This is VK3SL saying hello, good evening, and welcome to these test transmissions on the 160 metres and 2 metre airwaves and streaming online and stuff. Yay, all right, another week, another week of the proverbial avalanche. And I've just come back from a party, just sort of fell through the door and with my pile of records, slammed them onto the desk, switched on the transmitter, and I haven't really thought about what we're going to do tonight. Is this going to be one of those things that unfolds as we go? But been to an Eastern European party, so I think I might depart from tradition and start off with some Eastern European Balkan gypsy music, all for test purposes, of course. VK3SL testing. Okay, we're hearing a selection of Balkan gypsy music from a traditional music channel. There's a few other things here. I might just take a break and work out what is happening here. And we'll have a bit more of a listen, I think. VK3SL.
To
Rightio, this is a selection of Romani music, traditional Balkan gypsy music. So we're just sort of sampling a bit of this. I'm just still reeling after being at a Eastern European party. I've still got my Romanian shirt on, and I wore a typical traditional pork pie hat, and my family all dressed up. It was a bit of a wag, really. So yes, enjoying the sounds of Eastern Europe. I miss Eastern Europe. I've got very fond memories of travelling through Eastern Europe. Spent a lot of time there. Lived in Prague for quite a while. Twice, actually. And then we did a long walk for months over the Karpati range. And we spent nearly 3 months walking through Slovakia, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Romania. Then we came back the following year and spent some time in the Ukraine. It was a very impressionable experience. I love revisiting it. So we'll listen a little bit more, and I'll just assemble a small playlist. This is VK3SL, waxing lyrical about gypsy music. Okay, this is VK3SL. We're testing here on 160 metres and 2 metres streaming online as well. It can be found at my QRZ page. Just look up my call sign and you'll see it there. A link to the streaming service. I think a few people are listening on the service tonight. So hello to Jamie. I think you're listening. And what I will do, I think I'll just, I'm sort of feeling deeply nostalgic, to be honest, hearing all this stuff. I just love this music and the flavour of the party and the costumes and the reminiscences have been quite immediate. So, yay, we listened to this wonderful stuff. I did record sounds when we went on our travels. I took a DAT machine, particularly on the second trip. It was on the second trip I had a DAT machine, and that's when we went to Ukraine as well. And I spent some time catching the sounds of the sheep and the cows with their bells, the ringing of the bells and distant echoing valleys. It was an incredible experience, and the shepherds knew the sound so well they knew exactly by the pitch what the different herds were. So that was one really evocative sound. The other one was the church bells of the villages, and they kept time by the chiming of the village bells. It was something that was an experience I thought was very particular to certain cultures and environments. And of course the singing and the music making. There was often a lot of singing in restaurants, or not restaurants, but eating houses, and informal singing in shepherds' huts and in various settings. Some of the Czech people we sang with were passionate about their folk culture and would sing all the time. So maybe I'll feature another program on Czech folk music as well. So much to investigate, but I love that melismatic Aeolian mode minor key flavour of music, gypsy music particularly. You can hear its influence from the Far East, Turkish music in particular, and those flavours were really a part of their identity. That's a deeply reflective sort of tone or timbre and harmonic sense, I suppose. Anyhow, well, we'll see what else is on this site, because I'll probably we'll listen to one more. I think we'll listen to one more, and then I'll sort of change tack. So I've had my moment of nostalgia, of reminiscing, and we'll just enjoy another track of Balkan gypsy music. This is VK3SL.
Sika
to say, folks, that this music's taken me further and further into another universe. I probably should re-emerge and we can follow on with this theme another time. It's something I'd like to keep coming back to, but isn't it wonderful to hear that influence? I suppose the Gypsy people were very transient. They moved from, they were constantly on the move. They're sort of nomadic almost, really, and then you get the influences of all of those Eastern Slavic, Romanian, I don't know, even Byzantine Greek music, Jewish music is omnipresent, even some Spanish influence there. So it's great to sort of see that all in profile, but it's wonderful stuff. Alrighty, well, what I might do now is I think we'll dispense with our 20s segment tonight, jazz segment. I think we'll just sort of take a slightly different course. I did receive some material from one of our composers in residence. That's Mr. Parker. He's been very busy with his wideband receiver. And when we met up with at the QRP by the Bay event, we were experimenting with this wideband receiver and looking for the amalgam of Melbourne radio life. Trying to find something where all the signals were conglomerate at the same level, so it was it meant the listener wasn't sort of faced with one or two dominant stations, so it allows you to sort of meander in your imaginings, your listenings. So yeah, Peter's been hard at work and found some really great examples he's put together. So I'll have a listen to one of these, recorded in the Eastern Burbs. He recorded this about a week ago. So we'll have to sample this on some of his work. I'm just going to fade this actually, because I'm sort of finding myself listening. That's the problem. Okay, we'll fade our Balkan array and we'll find Mr. Parker's link here and we'll have a listen to about a 5-minute segment of Urban Sounds, radio sounds, recorded I think he said he recorded these at the park near the EMDRC, so about a week ago or thereabouts. So thanks, Peter. Let's have a listen now. This is VK3SL testing.
The money you own can be fined up to $200,000. Hello, welcome to June.
Or something else is required.
One recommendation in the Shergold was that engineers should be required to be registered. Jonathan Russell says Engineers Australia strongly supports that call.
While the state scattered showers over the southwest spreading eastwards during the evening, only isolated light showers extending north of the divide. Morning fog patches inland, showers mainly in southern and mountain areas, contracting eastwards during the morning and clearing by the afternoon. In Melbourne now it's 13 degrees.
ABC Radio Melbourne Traffic. Good afternoon, Holly Dodd from the Australian Traffic Network. If you're heading through Preston, just a
Another big
reminder,
issue on
High
today's
Street
agenda was
Road,
insurance. Insurance premiums for surveyors, engineers and architects rose sharply after the discovery of defects in apartment buildings in New South Wales, as well as problems with flooding and flooding. The Insurance Grilled, Caltex, Neil Perry's Rockshores, Hessel Blumenthal, Shannon Bennett, sometimes celebrities, sometimes big presenters. Earlier this week, there was a dispute between the Victorian and Commonwealth governments over whether the Commonwealth should contribute to a $600 million project to rectify up to 500 buildings with combustible cladding. Karen Andrews today reiterated the Commonwealth's position that it will not be contributing, and it's up to the states to bear that cost.
David Sparks with that report. The United States has formally kicked its NATO ally Turkey out of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter because it purchased a missile interceptor system from Russia. Not coexist with the Russian intelligence collection platform. It's another hiccup for the Joint Strike Fighter program, and tonight will focus focus on its readiness for the job. A director with the US Government Accountability Office has told PM the Joint Strike Fighter will fail to meet a basic functionality deadline set by the former Defence Secretary. And in a rare Australian interview, this official also raises serious questions about a new multi-billion-dollar phase of modernisation for the strike fighter. Australia is now locked into purchasing this plane, so is public criticism only aiding Australia's enemies? Sarah Dingle reports.
The multi-billion-dollar F-35 is billed as a true fifth-generation aircraft, unmatched in stealth. But China and Russia both have competitors in production. To maintain the edge, the F-35 is now beginning a round of modernisation, mostly software upgrades, to give the aircraft new capabilities.
Maybe an issue. Our report reported on that and in fact made a recommendation that they create a complete business case before they move forward.
The GAO is sometimes called the Congressional Watchdog. It's an independent government agency investigating US federal spending.
Mission capable, which is just being able to conduct a report. As of November 2018 was only at 52. Turning the place and the supply base, they have to redraw a lot of things.
Was a strong critic of the F-35. But when the F-35A's low mission capable rate, Dr. Joyner said Australia is actually now so involved with this aircraft, we should no longer discuss our concerns in the media.
We now cannot turn back, and it isn't helpful in many respects to have a public discourse about any deficiencies that might be there in the aircraft, because it only helps potential adversaries.
So the public should not be discussing any concerns or flaws within this multi-billion-dollar defence acquisition program.
Clearly, if it's in the public domain in the US, then it should be of concern to our leaders. Putting deficiencies into the public domain is not helpful, and also, there are some people out there who have the attitude that we should be saying.
This is VK3SL testing on 160 and 2 metres and also streaming online, and we just heard the latest offering from Mr. Parker, a field recording using his wideband, ultra-wideband receiver. So we heard a vast array of different stations, predominantly ABC I might add, but good, something to listen deeply and hear the amalgam of different stations all sort of weighing for our attention, I suppose. But I do enjoy something that's a bit of a pastiche. Now, I've just been sent a file. Let's have a look at this. Just this minute. Now, this could be interesting. It's not a recording I'm aware of. It's a test pressing from 1918. It says here, in 1918, HMV issued a record that is purported to be genuine recording of a gas bombardment conducted by the Royal Garrison Artillery. There are a number of YouTube videos that contain the audio from this recording, and there's been much debated as to whether or not the recording is genuine. And it says here that I believe that the issued recording is a fake, recorded in the HMV studios by using whistles, studio guns, bass drums, and other theatrical devices to give the impression of a gas bombardment attack. And it goes on to talk about these fake recordings. Now, I've heard the subject discussed before, but it's an interesting curiosity. So it is a test recording, and it comes from the archive of Nick Dello. So just out of interest, it only goes for a minute. We'll have a listen to a so-called gas bombardment from 1918, VK3SL. right, so that was an interesting curiosity, so-called gas bombardment, HMV test pressing. So wonder what sort of discussions will ensue about that. I'm sure it'll be heavily debated as to its veracity, but anyhow, interesting. All right, well, we can move on to an OTR segment now. There was quite a bit of interest last week playing this some samples from this new collection of transcription records which have been bestowed upon me, and in particular the recordings with Johnny McMahon and Stella Lamond. And that one track, well, it may even become a good theme song for these missions. That's still sitting on the turntable, haven't done anything, but there's something special about playing a 16-inch record with a Autophon cartridge and Autophon arm, an A cartridge and an Autophon arm. It's something very authentic. So I'll play that track again while I quickly sort out what the next section is. We might just have a bit of a listen to this. So let's see what Johnny McMahon has to say to Stella Lamond. Very politically incorrect.
As a fault or two.
That's quite right, I agree with you. You very seldom find both genius and good looks.
Now, for example, let's take you.
No, let's take you.
Why?
Because you're dumb.
Who, me?
But so beautiful. So dumb. But so sweet. I'll bet you couldn't boil an egg without reading a book.
My mama said with eyes like mine I'd be crazy to cook.
Oh, you're so dumb.
I'm sorry.
Oh, but so beautiful.
So dumb, it really hurts.
You're telling me. Why, your head's completely empty, chum.
But do you care if I am dumb?
Not as long as you're beautiful.
I'm sorry, I'm dumb.
Oh, forget it, kid.
But I'm glad I'm beautiful.
So am I.
Why am I so dumb, but so sweet?
I'll tell you. A peanut shell would hold more than your brain, I declare.
Are you incinerating that I'm not quite over there?
No, but you're plain dumb.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But so beautiful.
So dumb, it really hurts.
I'll say it hurts. I gaze upon that lovely dome and realize there's no one home, but gee, are you beautiful. Darling, you know, I don't know what to do with you. You take notice of every little thing I say.
Oh, dear, have I done something wrong again?
Well, no, not exactly. But when I was angry the other night and told you to go jump in the lake, I didn't mean you to take off your shoes and go wading in.
But I thought you said...
I know what you thought, darling, but I didn't mean it literally.
You didn't what, dear?
I didn't mean it.
Oh, you didn't want me to jump in the lake?
That's right, dear.
Then you weren't telling the truth.
No, dear, I wasn't telling the truth.
Oh, Johnny, that's bad. My mother told me to always tell the truth, and you tell me to tell the truth, and yet you don't tell the truth yourself. I think it's perfectly disgusting. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Look, really... forget it, will you? I give up. Oh, you're so dumb. You know you have total amnesia.
Well, thank you, darling.
Oh, you're so dumb. Why, look, you're driving me mad.
My mama says if I can't think of anything to say, just smile at old men, my dear, and you'll get by that way.
You're not so dumb. Boy, you're beautiful. So dumb, it really hurts.
Well, if I'm dumb, why do I like Johnny McMahon singing on the air?
What did you say?
I said if I'm dumb, why do I like your singing on the air?
Listen, there are people listening, honey. That's not fair.
Well, am I dumb?
No, darling.
Am I beautiful?
Oh, of course, dear. Well, I don't care if you're dumb as long as you're beautiful.
Okay. Well, that was that's probably going to be our next theme song, I think. We heard Johnny McMahon and Stella Lamont. Now, I'm going to flip the disc now. I just realised there will be some dead air. I'm a bit dumb about this. What we'll do is I'll speak up. Or can I use another microphone while I'm doing this? Let's see if I can swing one around. This is another microphonics here. Let's see. If this Let's see if this works. Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, this is quite a different mic. I'll probably sound a bit boomy here. Anyhow, it means I can sort of talk while I sort the situation out. It's a bit more local to the transcription table. Let's clean the stylus. And we'll take this big bicycle wheel disc off the turntable. What is it labelled? It says Lations Star Night. Obviously a variety program. And we've established who the artists are. There's an interesting personal story here. Johnny McMahon, who was the male vocalist on that last one, was actually the next door neighbour to my mother when she grew up in Caulfield in the 1940s. So there we have it. Okay, well, we'll listen to part 2 of that same program on a different disc, and we'll just line things up, and we'll just drop the stylus and fade in, and we'll see what's on offer. I have absolutely no idea. VK3SL testing.
Astro Starnight presents the internationally famous impressionist and entertainer, Clifford Guest.
Good evening, Leslie.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Tell me, where have you been all over the weekend?
I went camping with the Boy Scouts.
Oh, camping with the Boy Scouts. Did you have a good time?
Oh, yes, indeed, sir. We found a lovely spot.
That's so?
Yes, sir.
Good spot for camping, was it?
Yes, it must have been, sir. After all, 50,000 ants can't be wrong, can they?
So you're a Boy Scout, Leslie. Tell me, what is the first thing you learned when you joined the Boy Scouts?
Yes, indeed, sir. You learn where the Girl Guides hang out. Yes, I found that out, sir.
Yes, I bet you did.
How do you know? You know, sir, there's a lovely big nudist colony down there, too.
A nudist colony?
Oh, yes, sir. They wanted me to join.
Wanted you to join the nudist colony?
That's right, sir. Gee, they kidded me.
They kidded you?
Yes, they kidded the pants off me. You know, sir, they got some famous people down there, too.
I beg your pardon?
I said they got... You bet. I said they got some famous people.
Famous people in the nudist colony?
That's right, sir.
Oh, that's impossible, not the nudist colony, Leslie.
That's right, sir. No, there's some big pots down there. Yes. Tell me, sir, are you supposed to be a good ventriloquist?
Oh, well, that's... I don't know, Leslie, but... one press report describes me as a model ventriloquist.
Oh, that's bad, sir. That's very bad.
What do you mean it's very bad?
You know what a model is, don't you? An imitation of the real thing.
Yes, well, I think it's time we got on with the act, Leslie. Tell me, what do you intend doing tonight?
Well, sir, I can imitate a chicken very well.
Oh, what do you do, whistle?
No, eat worms.
Well, let's now for the act. And you can help me if you like, if you wish now. Now, here's our impression of a ship bringing home prisoners of war.
Prisoners of war?
That's it. Here they come now. Listen to that siren.
Ahoy there!
Ahoy there!
Look, Leslie, there's a small motorboat there.
Where's sir?
Over there, just going out to meet them, see?
Are you glad to be back?
What'd you say?
I said, are you glad to be back?
What'd you say?
Gee whiz. I said, they're going to send you back.
Like hell they are.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's my impression of a flock of sheep. A shepherd bringing home a flock of sheep at sunset. I want you to imagine the barking of the dog, the calling of the shepherd, and the bleating of the sheep coming nearer and nearer.
Sophistication hits so high as that lass with the delicate air, Eula Parker, joins yours truly in a spot of Noel Coward and Gertrude Lawrence to the tune of Thanks for the Memory. Thanks for the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse.
And chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse, how lovely it was.
And thanks for the memory of rainy afternoons, swinging Gibson tunes,
and motor trips and burning lips and burning toast and prunes.
How lovely it was. We said goodbye with a highball, and we got as high as a steeple. But we were intelligent people.
No tears, no fuss.
Hooray for us, and thanks for the memory
of faults that you forgave, rainbows on a wave,
and stockings in the basin when a fella needs a shave.
Well, thank you
so much. Fancy seeing you here.
I'm on my honeymoon.
Very interesting. So am I.
I hope you're enjoying it.
It hasn't started yet.
Neither has mine.
Are you happy?
Archie is very good to me.
I said, are you happy?
I'm much too busy to think about it, are you?
Ecstatically.
Good. What's she like? Very beautiful?
No, but she thinks she has a certain quaint charm. I'm much too much of a gentleman to disillusion her.
I see. Have you known her long?
Not long. I say that orchestra seems to have a remarkably small repertoire.
I don't see why. It's Bob Gibson's orchestra.
Still, I never did care for...
Bob Gibson happens to be a friend of mine.
I'm sorry. I noticed, my darling, that you're still wearing my favorite perfume.
And you still smoke that foul pipe?
Of course. That was the reason you gave for divorcing me, wasn't it?
Must we talk about it?
I'm sorry.
It doesn't really matter. Let's talk about something else, anything. What have you been doing lately during these last years?
I went around the world, you know, after...
Yes, of course I know. How was it?
The world?
Yes.
Very large.
And how was King's Cross?
Very much like St. Kilda.
And Kensington. How was Kensington?
It smells. May I say that you're looking more beautiful than ever?
Thank you. I notice your hair's receding slightly. I hope you don't mind my mentioning it.
Not at all. I'm glad you noticed it. It proves, my darling, that you're still interested.
Of course I'm interested. What fools we were to ruin it all. What utter fools.
Yes, we were so ridiculously in love.
And yet, here we are, starting off together with two quite different people in love all over again, aren't we?
Of course we aren't, and you know it. I'm in love with you, and I always will be, whatever happens.
Please don't. You're making me cry.
Please, believe me.
I do believe you.
And you love me too, don't you?
I must be going.
Don't you?
My husband will be looking for me.
Of course. I'm sorry to have kept you.
Before I go, I'd like to thank you.
Thank me? What for?
For the memory and strictly entre nous. Darling, how are you?
And how are all the little dreams that never did come true?
Awfully glad I met you. Cheerio and toodaloo.
Chin, old thing.
And thank you.
Thank you. So a message from Aspro.
Put Aspro tablets on the list of things you want for holidays. Aspro will banish sun glare headaches and eye strain, and a dose of Aspro when going to bed will help to give you refreshing sleep. Aspro is practically a holiday necessity, so take a packet with you when you go away. Remember, always use A-S-P-R-O, Aspro.
Bob Gibson presents, with his Music for Moderns, his own arrangement of that lovely melody, Paradise.
And then he holds my hand, la da da da, la di da da, and then I understand, la da da da, la di da da. His eyes are fire with one desire, then a heavenly kiss. Could I resist? And then he dims the lights. And then he holds me tight. Hold tight, hold tight. Each kiss, each fond caress, they lead the way to happiness. He takes me to
There we have it. That's a selection from Johnny McMahon and Stella Lamont from, I suppose, the late 40s, early 50s, directly off a transcription record. I better catch the stylus before it falls off the edge. It's a centre start record, so that's a new thing to get used to, but there's something quite theatrical about playing a 16-inch record using the original arrangement. And it actually sounded very, very fine in here. Pity about the content. Some of the content was so lame. But that's the way they did it, folks. Variety programs from that period were not terribly progressive or interesting, really. Although I have to say, Bob Gibson's orchestra were quite a polished ensemble. I'd like to find a little bit more about what his background was and what he went on to do. And wonder where his arrangements ended up. I know the 3DB archive ended up at there was a museum, an education department museum, which I used to, a library, which I used to borrow from, and I had a bit to do with, and they had the entire Percy Pledger collection, and that was a massive collection, which ended up being archived and it's now inaccessible. But in an earlier life, I used to run a Palm Court orchestra on occasion. It was sort of a seasonal thing to do with one of the music camps I I worked at, and I used quite a bit of material from that Percy Pledger collection, and it was so much fun playing those arrangements. Some of them were very quite complex too. They were good. But anyhow, that's another story. But yep, Bob Gibson, we've just heard the orchestra there. And I presume that was syndicated to 3KZ. I think they did the Aspro program, but there's probably a bigger story there to look at. Anyhow, all right, well, we'll switch that one off, and we'll switch off the buyer, and we'll turn on the SP10, because I've lined up a bit of Nancy Weir. You might remember, or those who have listened to these programs might remember that we had a number of features on Nancy Weir. This followed I suppose you could say, the discovery of that Movietone outtake from 1929, and there was quite a lot of interest in Nancy Weir for a while. And I sort of followed on with played some of her Spotlight records, and put a few up on YouTube, and one thing led to another, and it came about that I partook in a podcast made by the Herald Sun. One of their reporters, Jen Kelly, interviewed me, and one of my work colleagues who knew Nancy Weir. I never knew her, but one of my work colleagues did. So it was all put together as a bit of a story, and it sort of looked at a wartime activity a bit, but also profiled her career. So I think we'll play it. It was uploaded a couple of weeks ago. I went into the Herald Sun and into their recording booth and did the interview. Just chatted about her really, and they did a good job putting it all together. But before doing that, I think we'll have a listen to one of her recordings on the Spotlight label. This one here actually belongs to Chris, who might be listening. And I have to get it back to you, Chris. I haven't dubbed it yet. This is from an album called Music to Charm. And it had a few tracks that I'd never heard before. And one of them was the Malaguena by Albanese. And it's a particularly fine performance, really beautiful playing. I love her sense of line and her timing. It just sits beautifully. It's tremendous. So I think we'll have a listen to this first, and then I'll follow on with this this podcast. So that goes for about 20 minutes, I think. About 25 minutes. So sit back and see what you think, and we'll have another episode of Nancy. So without any further ado, I'm just checking that I've got everything set up ready to go. Okay, I think we're right. This is VK3SL. She had to get into Rome. The airport had been bombed, apparently, and she was parachuted in.
We now introduce to you Nancy Weir, girl pianist.
They said that she had the greatest ear since Mozart.
I shall now play this little piece that I composed when I was 10.
She was a member of the resistance. She was dropped into occupied France.
She parachuted into Germany night after night behind the lines and spied for the Allies.
I'm Jen Kelly, and this is In Black and White, a podcast about some of Victoria's forgotten characters. In this episode, we explore the intriguing tale of Nancy Weir, a child prodigy and classical pianist who became a musical spy for the Allies against the Germans during World War II, and the stories of her being parachuted in behind enemy lines. Weir shot to fame at age 13 when she performed at Melbourne Town Hall, playing Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 3 with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. She was born in Melbourne, but then grew up behind the bar of a pub her father ran in the New South Wales Riverina town of Lockhart, where she would play songs on the piano to entertain customers. There's a resurgence in interest in Nancy Weir's life since the recent discovery of a film of her at age 14 at the 3LO radio studios in Melbourne. It's been found in all places in the University of South Carolina archives. Melbourne musician and music teacher Stephen Langley has been researching the life of Nancy Weir, and he joins us today. Stephen, welcome to the In Black and White podcast.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to talk about Nancy Weir.
Lovely. Can you tell us, why do you have an interest in Nancy Weir?
Nancy Weir. Look, I think it's a fascinating story. She was obviously a musician of the highest calibre, and the fact that she's homegrown, she comes from Melbourne, and she had this meteoric rise to fame and adoration, really, when you think about how she was received in Melbourne when she was a 13-year-old. So there's a fascinating sort of backstory there, and then, of course, the involvement during the war, what she did during the war is a really interesting subject in itself, her rise to fame. And, and I think a lot of it's come about since the Fox Movietone outtakes have become available, and we've now have this film of her in 1929, and I think that was the catalyst. That's what sort of set the ball rolling.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let's start at the beginning. So she was born in 1915 in Kew in Melbourne suburbs. So she was born during World War I. Now, I've read that she knew the piano keyboard from the age of 18 months, and that when she was 4, she sneaked out to a nearby convent to have lessons from a nun.
Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? So, look, incredible beginnings. And then one interesting anecdote is that at the 1926 Australia Day exhibition, there was a piano stall. There was like a stall where people would get up and perform. And she sat there and performed all her repertoire that she'd learnt herself, taught herself. And she was like a magnet. People came from everywhere just to hear this young child just basically improvising, playing pieces, and including... Amongst them was I think it was the owner of the store was a student or an associate of Ada Corder or Ada Freeman. And Ada Freeman was one of Melbourne's most established teachers. And they heard this child playing and said, what's going on here? This child should be formally taught, should be supported. And from that point on, there was a new relationship with Ada Corder was established, and then Nancy was able to have formal lessons, and then that was the beginning of her meteoric rise to fame.
Okay, and you mentioned the concert at Melbourne Town Hall at age 13. How unusual was that for the times?
Very unusual for a child to be to have that sort of fame bestowed upon her. And look, she played with incredible authority. She was revered. They had to turn away 3,000 people. In fact, the promoters of the concert were fined. Were prosecuted because they were undercated for the event. So that in itself is amazing. And then afterwards, she was just met with she was mobbed. There was a frenzy following her, and such to the extent that the Lord Mayor of Melbourne decided to put together a fund to try and support her to be taught overseas and to be for her to travel and to experience music more widely. So that was the beginning, really.
And it was only a few months after that concert when she was in this amazing footage that we've got from 3LO.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that film from 1929, November, I think, 1929, is is really fascinating because it really captures her at that nexus, that point where she started to flourish as a player and become recognised. And it's interesting that the Fox Movie Tone, I think they visited Melbourne for just a few days at that time. It was the very early days of their working with sound and vision, and they chose to represent Nancy as an important subject in Melbourne at that time. So it's remarkable that event occurred. And yeah, she's playing her own composition, a piece that she wrote at the age of 10, and it's some beautifully mature, wonderful music, and it's before she had any formal tuition at all, so that makes it all even the more special.
And I understand that it was thought that this footage had disappeared in a fire 40 years ago, and it's only recently come to light.
Yes, the negatives or the outtakes of these Fox Movie Tone news have been sort of been discovered and disseminated, and now they're sort of available to the public at large, and now we can see this, and it's in remarkable quality. It's incredible to watch because the detail's all there and the sound's actually very good for the time.
Okay, well, let's play part of that video now, the sound obviously, and it begins with the 3LO announcer introducing Nancy.
3LO Melbourne. With the greatest pleasure, we now introduce to you Nancy Weir, the girl pianist. Nancy Weir is 14 years of age. She has been studying the piano for the last 3.5 years only. The piece she will play for you was composed by herself at the age of 10. As you see, this was before she started pianoforte lessons. It was this early indication of exceptional ability which brought about the engagement of Miss Freeman as her teacher. The world-famous pianists Friedman and Shura-Shikarsky, as well as all the leading musicians of Melbourne, have predicted a brilliant future for this little girl. Shura-Shikarsky even made the definite statement that Nancy Weir, if given the right opportunity, should develop into one of the greatest women pianists of the world. The Lord Mayor of Melbourne is so interested that he has called together an influential committee which is now occupied in raising the sum of £2,000 to enable Nancy Weir to take a 5-year course of study in Europe. And now hear Nancy Weir herself.
When I was told that I was to broadcast from the 3LO studio in Melbourne, I thought that it would be most exciting and interesting. But now the time has come, I'm a little bit scared about the talking. I would rather play to you than talk. I shall now play this little piece that I composed when I was 10.
Now, if any listeners would like to see the video in full, you can find the link in the companion article to this podcast. Just follow the link in the show notes. Now, what happened next? So at this stage she's 14. What happened next in her life?
So after the concert, a public subscription made by the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, he established funds to support her going overseas, and she firstly went to Berlin, I think. She might have briefly been in London, but she was in Berlin for a significant period and auditioned for Arthur Schnabel, who was a very well-known, great teacher, very established teacher in Europe and performer. So she studied with Schnabel for some time. She became a part of the establishment. The lessons was a total immersion experience at that time. You had to go to all of the classes. You had to travel with your teacher. I think she went to Switzerland with him. You had to go to all of the concerts. It was a very immersive experience. So she was thrown into the deep end.
Schnabel, who was Jewish, left Germany in 1933 after the Nazis came to power, and Nancy Weir moved to London and studied at the Royal Academy of Music. World War II broke out in 1939, interrupting Nancy Weir's promising career when she was only 24. By then she was already a gifted pianist with a remarkable intellect and memory. She had fluency in German and a phenomenal musical ear. It was said that Nancy Weir could hear as many as 5 musical lines simultaneously, whereas most professional musicians have difficulty with 3. These were all skills that were soon to become invaluable when she became what she later called a musical spy. When the war broke out, Weir joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or WAAF, but she was then transferred to intelligence with the Royal Air Force because she spoke fluent German. Later in life, she said she'd spent time during the war sitting on a hilltop in Kent listening to the chatter of young German pilots. It's thought the intelligence gathered by Nancy Weir and others like her would have been relayed to decryption sites such as the famous Bletchley Park, the top-secret home of Britain's World War II codebreakers. Stephen Langley believes Nancy Weir's acute listening skills would have been highly useful both in interpreting the German pilots' chatter and also as part of what was called DF, or direction finding, which was an essential skill that allowed the Allies to locate the positions of enemy aircraft and submarines.
This made her invaluable in that setting. She was able to hear, well, she had deep listening and great memory, retention skills, and that was utilised. So, yes, she was listening. I think she was of great use to them. So I think she was even promoted to a flight officer status eventually. So she said she prevented bomb attacks through her listening. There's not a lot known about exactly what transpired. We're doing a little bit about the Y stations and the direction finding interception arrangements. They had stations dotted all over the place where people would be in a remote hut away from the potential interference, and they'd be listening to signals, very, very faint signals, and listening and calibrating where planes might be or where submarines might be by listening to signals from different axes and being able to work out the relative strength of signals. So that information typically was passed on to places like Bletchley Park and Buckinghamshire, and so where it would have been sort of formally used for the war effort. So yes, remote listening arrangements, I think it required very sensitive equipment and required very, very good ears. So I would assume that's the type of work she was talking about when she mentioned her listening, her surveillance.
The full extent of Nancy Weir's activities during World War II will forever remain murky. Nancy Weir did say she spent 2 years in Cairo, 7 months in Algiers and 15 months in Rome. And in one extraordinary story, Weir said, "I was to fly into Rome, but the Allies had destroyed the airfield, so I had to parachute in." And she added, "I think I am the only classical pianist in history who ever parachuted into Rome." While many people who knew Nancy Weir believe this really happened, others are equally certain it was simply evidence of her quirky sense of humour.
Well, that's an interesting story. She said that I think it was towards the end of the war, and she was working as an interpreter for POW interviews. So I think there was in that capacity she had to get into Rome. The airport had been bombed apparently, and she was parachuted in. And then I don't know how she got out, but that's it's an interesting tale. But there are a few question marks about that.
And of course, she didn't talk much about her war service at all, even after the 50-year period of secrecy had elapsed. So a lot of the stories that we're hearing are really second-hand and third-hand, aren't they? They're stories
Very
that
much so. Yeah, stories that sort of passed down through some of her students. I mean, look, some of the stories are incredible. One of her students said that she parachuted into Germany night after night behind the lines and spied for the Allies. And he also validated that she went to Cairo concertising as a cover while she was spying. But look, the story of being parachuted into Germany night after night and then plucked out, I think the parachuting stories seem to be sort of quite strong amongst people who recount their experiences talking to Nancy Weir. And there's that one remarkable story about her being dropped behind enemy lines in Germany. Now, I find this very hard to believe. I don't know how this could happen, but apparently she told Jeffrey Saber that she was dropped behind the enemy lines and spied for the Allies.
And he was one of her students?
Yes. So he said that. But look, that's an interesting story. Maybe it happened. Maybe extraordinary things happened. Maybe she did do that and was spirited out in some remarkable way. She said she had a very interesting war. That's her war words. So go figure.
So she did describe herself as a musical spy, didn't she? So what do you think that was the truth of her level of involvement?
I think the DF activity, the listening, the deep listening, she had this extraordinary musical prowess. She had almost a savant ability in her listening, which enabled her to play large works with very, very little practice through just listening. She had that remarkable, rare ability to sort of almost learn through osmosis, just through listening. So that was exploited. They could see that she had this ability, and she could speak fluent German as well. I know that they limited some of the Germans were very careful that when they were communicating, to try and keep the messages less than 30 seconds, because they felt that the direction finding capacity was less if they kept their messages really short. But I've also read that people like Nancy could intercept with their abilities, their listening abilities, their deep listening, their focus, were able to sort of work with DF critically within a few seconds, which I think is a remarkable feat. And I think very few people had that ability. So she would have been in that sort of higher class of intelligence, and particularly listening. So I think listening was her main involvement. Now I'm sure she was parachuted into places or had quite extraordinary experiences. It's documented that she did give concerts in Cairo and in Algiers, and that's well documented that she did do that. And I'm sure there are a lot of undercover activities, the extent of which we don't know the full story. But yes, I think interception and surveillance would have been her main thrust.
Now, what about life after the war? Did she come back to Australia?
Yeah, she struggled a bit to re-establish her career after the war in London. She went back to London. She concertised for a bit, and then she decided her father became ill in 1954, I think, and then she came back to Australia about that time and then established herself in the musical establishment here. So, yeah, she started off in Melbourne for a while. She played at the 56 Olympics. She played the Schumann Concerto at the 1956 Olympics, and then she went up to Queensland and became a member of the Queensland Conservatorium staff, and she taught extensively right up to 1980, had many, many students who adored her. They revered her. She was held in the highest esteem, and she was quite an eccentric person. I think people sort of connected with her because of her independent spirit as well. And everyone spoke very admiringly about her music, her musicianship, her musical prowess, her gift for musical architecture, her sense of style, and all of that wonderful deep influence sort of made her an elder statesperson, in her field. So, yeah, okay. She was highly revered.
How well known was she in Australia and in Europe? Was she a household name?
I don't think she was a household name in Europe. She was one of many people establishing themselves in the 30s. It was a tumultuous time. It would have been hard for her. It was predicted that she would become, I think Shorat Shakasi, a great pianist who heard her in Melbourne in the early days, said that she would become one of the greatest stars ever. In fact, and when she was studying at the Royal Academy of Music, they said that she had the greatest ear since Mozart. Now, that's a profound statement. That was, I think, came from Harold Craxton or someone within the Royal Academy of Music. And, I think that says a lot about her, and that remarkable story of her learning the Busoni Bach Chaconne within a week. Very, very few people could do something like that. It's quite extraordinary.
As a piano teacher and performer after the war in Melbourne, Nancy Weir made several recordings for the Spotlight record label, including the one we're playing through the podcast. Later, at the Queensland Conservatorium Music School in Brisbane, she was described as a wild bronco who was passionate about teaching and performing music, but had little time for bureaucratic niceties. We've been lucky enough to speak to Di Beattie, who was studying music at the Queensland Conservatorium when Nancy Weir was teaching there in the 60s. Di Beattie, who lives in Melbourne's east, is the sister of well-known classical musicians Keith and Geoffrey Crellin, and her whole family got to know Nancy Weir well. Di Beattie remembers her as gregarious, eccentric, and a lot of fun to be around.
She'd had such a life. She'd never married, but she'd had a big life. And she'd done a lot of things on a very large canvas, I think. And also was very, very clever. And a beautiful pianist.
All right. And did you know her little dog? Did you ever see her little
Cully,
dog
yes.
on stage?
Cully, everybody knew Cully. The lift doors would open and Cully would wander out and look around. If Nancy wasn't there, she'd get back in with you and go to the next floor to find Nancy. And some people used to go, oh, come on, Cully, we'll find Nancy for you. So Cully went everywhere with Nancy. She was her baby. And I would remember there visiting Mum there one day, and Mum got out of the lift with a little dog at her. She said, Cully's looking for Nancy. Have you seen Nancy? So Cully was very much treated pretty much as part of what happened at the Queensland Conservatorium at that stage.
All right. And Cully was sometimes on stage as well.
Cully was sometimes on stage. I never saw her on stage. That was probably after I'd left Brisbane.
So did Cully just wander on the stage, or was she...
She sometimes sit... I'm not sure about that. Keith did tell me she sometimes sit under the piano. So I have a feeling that someone told me, yes, she did wander on and off stage. And I think people got used to the fact that Cully was part of the package you got when you got Nancy. I'm pretty sure that she was just like her child, obviously. And occasionally someone else would take her out for a little toilet break and she'd come back in again.
So what do you know about Nancy Weir from the war years? What are you aware of?
My knowledge about the war years is that she was a member of the resistance. She was dropped into occupied France, and she was obviously parachuted in because the story I said about her being parachuted in after the war to give a piano recital. I mean, it's pretty bizarre, isn't it? You parachute someone in at the end of the war because it was too dangerous to land in Berlin. It was too dangerous at that stage still to land anywhere. That's what I got from what my brother told me. And she gave a recital, so therefore she was absolutely used to parachuting into Europe because she'd obviously, you don't just parachute someone in to do a piano recital. She hasn't done it before. So and Keith, the text I got from Keith said that he's pretty sure that, almost absolutely sure that yes, she parachuted into occupied France. She was behind enemy lines. And of course with her fluent German, one can only imagine. It'd be nice to know, but the fact that she never really gave any report or any newspaper any about that maybe meant that she didn't want to divulge too much about what went on.
Nancy Weir lived out her final years in Queensland and continued to share her love of music with everyone around her.
She did a few things. I think she toured China as an ambassador for Australia at one point in the 60s, which is an interesting story in itself. That would be a great one to flesh out. I'd like to know more about that. And she developed a hearing disorder which really affected her concertising, and she was cured to some degree, but I think it did make life a little less comfortable for her. So she sort of pursued a few other things as well. She ran a theatre, the Rialto Theatre in Brisbane for a while, for several years after she retired. And then, yes, she ran a store, and she lived in an old church, and she drove a little Mini Minor by all accounts, which had registration stickers all over the windows, and when she was pulled over and asked to remove them, she just put the car aside and bought another car and started collecting stickers again.
And she lived to the grand age of 93.
Yes, she did, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And apparently she had a piano in the nursing home where she was, and she was concerting and playing right up to the end. And there's some beautiful stories about her. She really believed in community music, and she did a lot to foster community music and bring people into her musical world. And so she ran musical safaris, these tours with university students, and they go into weird places all over in the country, everywhere, and they'd be concertising and they'd be sort of sharing music to a broader audience. And I think that says a lot about her belief in music as something that's for everybody.
Thanks for listening. This has been In Black and White, a podcast about some of Victoria's forgotten characters, written and hosted by me, Jen Kelly, and produced by Peter Fuller for the Herald Sun.
Okay, well there we have it. That's the podcast in question, and it's been quite an interesting experience reading about Nancy Weir and listening to her music, and I did enjoy partaking in that. Okay, I'm sorry you are hearing a lot of me tonight. let's have some more Nancy Ware. I have a recording here from the Spotlight label. This is from the Music to Charm record. And what's she playing? I think it's the Defiers. What's it? The Defiers Ritual Fire Dance. I think a very fitting conclusion to our Nancy Ware segment. This is VK3SL. Well, bravo, Nancy Ware. We heard then the Defiers Ritual Fire Dance. Yes, and what authoritative playing that was. Recorded for Spotlight. Recorded by Cyril Stevens at Spotlight in about 1958, I think that was recorded. So, yeah. We'll keep this chapter open. I think we'll find other recordings of Nancy Ware. It's a wonderful story, and there's I'd so like to find the recording of her playing the Schumann Concerto. There are a couple of around, but not easy to trace at this point in time. But, yep, it's a work they said she owned, and I like to hear that. I like the idea of an artist playing work and rediscovering it and finding its hidden depths. Well, I think she did that with the Schumann, and it's such a great piano concerto. I'd love to hear how she interprets it. So thanks for listening there, and yes, I've received an email from Mr. Jamie. So thanks, Jamie. And he's just acknowledging the Star Night recording, and he gives me a little bit of context. That's the transcription record I played earlier. And just to fill you in there, Jamie, I only played a bit of part 2, so it is an hour-long program, but I'm breaking it up into snippets and just playing it a bit each week. I did play the very end of part 1 because I had a song which I thought captured the spirit of my missions. And but the end, I think the singer on that was Stella Lamont, I think. That was my going from the preamble at the start, but I can revisit that, and I can certainly dub it off for you. There's no problem about that. And but you do acknowledge that the singer on part 2, the bit we just heard, was Eula Parker along with Johnny McMahon. And I think I mentioned that Johnny McMahon was my mother's neighbour, lived next door. So that's a little bit of a personal anecdote there. But yes, so they were recorded for 3UZ, apparently, from the early 40s to the early 50s. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that. Nice to have a bit of context. Yeah, I don't sort of... don't have a lot of information about the bigger picture with some of these things, so it's good to fill in the gaps. Yes, all right, so we move on. Now, it's getting a little bit late. I'm quite tired. I'm not going to go forever tonight, but I will play a couple of other things. There's been a lot happening here. It's been a whirlwind. It's always a whirlwind in this household, but it's sort of fun, and sometimes sort of serendipitous things or planets align and stuff happens that sort of brings me to musical themes that resonate. And one of them is, I won't go into the details, but there's been a few recordings played of Bach's Cello Suite number 6 in D major. This is BWV 1012, the last of his 6 suites for solo cello, and written during his Curtin period around about 1717. And the 6th suite was originally written for a piccolo cello as a 5-string cello, and none of those instruments exist. I think they've been recreated, but the particular instrument that was written for has more or less become obsolete. And to play it on a 4-string cello is really difficult. In fact, it's so difficult that even high-caliber artists are very reluctant to record the 6th suite. I think everyone likes to play it because it's just so wonderful to play, but mostly in their own boudoir or practice room. So anyhow, I did hear a couple of recordings of this week, and it just brought it all back to me because I spent a lot of time in London studying this work, and I never performed it publicly, but I just used to love playing it. And I haven't played it for years and years, decades. So I got it out this week, and I've spent a few hours meat-cleavering my way through it, and it's actually coming together. You never forget. It's funny how, somehow that muscle memory stays in your mind. And I found that I was able to sort of get it to some sort of presentable level. I'm not going to play myself playing it because it is pretty inconsistent. But I have found a recording of my teacher playing it. So this is rather special for me to hear this. And I did study it with him. We spent hours going through it. And we got the electron microscope out and underscored all of the harmonic tensions in the piece. And I remember studying all my raised thirds and raised sevenths to provide that sort of sense of urgency. He was very particular about sort of harmonic context, my teacher was. He was very uncomfortable with even temperament and felt that there always needed to be a harmonic impetus. So, yeah, that was all a part of the process. But anyhow, so putting my own expression aside, we'll have a listen to Christopher Bunting in London from a radio broadcast in the 1960s, and he's playing the Prelude to Cello Suite number 6 in D major. And I have to say, this is an epic work. This is Bach basically a solo cello is playing a whole orchestra. It is a work that just shines. It's exultant. That's all I can say. And I better start playing this before I just go crazy and try and get stultified not finding the words. All right then, let's have a listen. VK3SL testing. And we heard the prelude to the Sixth Suite in D major, BWV 1012, played by Christopher Bunting. And he taught me when I did my studies in London years ago. And he's a wonderful teacher, a very learned man. He had a room full of books, floor to ceiling. And it was one of those rooms that just breathed life and personality. It was a wonderful teaching studio. And yeah, he was a very interesting fellow. He had photographic memory, and he had that rare ability to see music in a non-linear way. He could experience music in like a snapshot, or like a vision, and see it in its totality. And yeah, his knowledge of music was quite extraordinary. But anyhow, I remember sitting there dissecting that work. But it's just such exalted music, so wonderful. So I'll be practicing that a lot this week. All right, so we move on, and it's getting closer to the end, and I, rather than sort of pick works myself from this point, I just went inside before and consulted the one of our resident experts on music in this household, and I asked what would be good to wind up proceedings, and it was it was suggested that I play Richard Strauss's Horn Concerto No. 2. Well, I don't know if it's time to play the whole work, but we'll listen to the first movement of the Richard Strauss Horn Concerto. It's such a fantastic piece, written when Strauss was quite elderly. In fact, this is a living testimony to the age myth. Strauss was in his mid-80s when he wrote this, and it's music that's a young person could have written. So it transcends age, it transcends any disability. It's music for all time, really. And so, yeah, go figure, it's incredible. So let's have a listen to Radek Babarak. Now, this was a particular choice. This artist, this French horn player, particularly captured the imagination of our resident expert and on French horn. So we'll have a listen to this, the first movement of Horn Concerto No. 2, and I'm VK3SL testing. Of course, that was a rather sudden ending there. Golly, I was just I was sitting there being tantalised by that beautiful performance, and suddenly it finished. I didn't even look at the screen. So, we heard Radek Babarak as the horn player with the Nippon Orchestra, recording made in Japan. It's actually a video. And, Richard Strauss's Horn Concerto No. 2. It's a wonderful piece. It's sort of, I think one movement segues onto the other next, so it's sort of it does have that sense of being a continuum. But, all right, well, I think we might finish up with another horn piece, same artist, and I was advised that this might be a very nice piece to finish up the whole program with. Again, we'll just listen to the first movement. So we hear Ozawa, Seiji Ozawa, wonderful conductor, and the Mito Chamber Orchestra, another Japanese group, and Radek Babarak is the soloist. And this time we're going to hear Mozart's Horn Concerto No. 2 in E-flat major. So this is K417. We'll just hear the first movement of this, and after that I'll stand by and have a listen on Channel D in case there's anyone there. But thank you for listening, folks. Appreciate your support with all of this crazy meandering, and if you listened this far, and we'll hopefully speak to you soon. VK3SL now tuning in to the music of Mr. Mozart.
Thank you.